Why are there so many abandoned abbeys laying in ruin throughout England? These were once thriving, in some cases enormous communities of people with massive wealth, from the world famous Whitby Abbey to North Yorkshire's Fountains Abbey, where we are today. And in the space of just 4 years, all of them disappeared, abandoned, closed down. But what happened? Why? Well, we're going to find out today. We're also going to find out the 3 characteristics that many of these abandoned abbeys share. And at the end of today's video, I'm going to be stashing these giveaway gifts somewhere in the local area for one of you to find. Before we do that though, come along with me and let's have an explore around the ruins and find out what happened here. So what's the story? Well, it's quite a big one, but I'm going to try and boil it down to the key parts today. And before we dive into the reasons behind why they closed, we need to kind of figure out what they were. Why were there so many of these? Why are they so big? And what did people here do? Well, there's at least one thing I personally struggle with these types of historical stories, and it's partly to do with just how far back we have to go. So, Fountains Abbey was founded in 1132. That's quite a long time ago. So long that it can be difficult to relate to the people around that time. Luckily, there are some parts to this story, though, that are relatable and can help us to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of some of the monks who were living here when this place was at its peak and thriving. This is one of the biggest examples of an abbey that's still standing in England, and at the time it was one of the wealthiest and largest communities. So how did it go from being one of the biggest, wealthiest, to being abandoned and left in ruins? Well, back in the 12th century, there were many of these abbeys and monasteries. These were home to the monks, people who had given and devoted their life to serving the Catholic faith. Now, the religious side of this in and of itself is actually quite complex because there are so many different orders of Catholicism, over 2,000. And monks, if we were to try and simplify their intent, their goals, they wanted to live, it's said, alone but together. So separate from the wider society, but within their own community, living by the same goals and rules as one another, serving their religion. And to cut a pretty long story short, that was kind of how these types of places, these monasteries and abbeys, started to form. I was actually wondering what this section was, but I can see it says here, infirmary. Somewhere here outside of the main abbey, there is a brewery and a bakery. Maybe that's on the other side. We'll go and find it soon. So these communities of monks were very prevalent around England and around the world. They answered to the Pope, they served the Pope, and in fact, an important detail, these abbeys and monasteries within England were paying taxes out to Rome. And that's an important detail that's kind of relevant to how they ended up like this. I'm trying to picture what this room would have been. If this was the infirmary, I don't know, there's not many clues. So these monasteries kind of provided this self-sustaining community. Many of them would be growing their own food, they'd be supplying jobs. And it goes without saying, from what's behind us right now, some of them had incredible amounts of money. Money being something when, in large volumes, and when it's being directed away from the state, can start to cause issues and power struggles. And for the most part, things were just taking over for a long time. We're condensing many years of religious history here, but it's for good reason, I promise. This, by the way, is the River Skell, which runs alongside the abbey. And there are 6 springs on the site here, which is where the name came from, Fountains Abbey. Now there's someone else who's involved in the story here, a big name, a name that sends shivers down the spine of many people who went to school in England, myself included, and it's Henry VIII, somebody who came up time and time again in my history classes in school. And I'll be honest, I found it all pretty boring at the time. I probably can't really blame the teachers. I think I had a general disinterest in history at that age. But Henry is very key to this story, and in many ways this is actually his fault, this is his doing. And one of the key events that took place in the timeline of this abbey and all of the abbeys was when Henry VIII named himself, legally became supreme head of the Church of England, effectively taking power away from the Pope and meaning he can just do whatever he wants. And he did many things that he wanted to do. One of the first things he did was start redirecting these taxes that were going to Rome and bringing them back to the crown. And based on that alone, you can probably start to piece together where this might be going. Ooh, the abbot's house. Now the abbot was the head of the abbey, the boss in other words. Still a surname that's fairly prevalent in England to this day. And some of the abbots didn't fare too well in this timeline. We'll get to those shortly though. So what else did Henry do after making himself the leader, putting himself in charge of the Church of England? Well, in 1536, things started to get pretty serious. This is the year of something called the dissolution of the lesser abbeys. At this point, Fountains Abbey was safe, but many smaller institutions were closed. And one of the main reasons for this, at least on paper, is that on the fringes of this whole institution, this network of religious buildings, there were many monasteries and abbeys that were believed to be operating not quite as they should be, not so much in the name of the Lord. And there were accusations of ill behaviour, private profiteering, things like prostitution, among other things. And these were all contributing factors to this growing idea of reformation, religious reformation around England. An increasing number of people who wanted change and in many ways wanted to take back control and just tidy things up in a sense. And so that's what Henry did. He instigated this. Many of these abbeys were closed, the smaller ones. The communities that were living there absorbed into some of the bigger abbeys. And in another timeline, maybe that could have been it. That could have been the end of the story. But it wasn't the end of the story, not even close. And this is one part of the history that is a little tricky to unpick. I always know I'm in trouble when I'm researching these stories for these videos, and then I'm reading books, watching videos from people who hold PhDs, and they can't agree on the subject matter. And this was one of those. There was a little bit of a dispute as to Henry's true motivations, whether it was purely financial, some kind of enormous cash grab, or whether it was driven mainly by his desire for a divorce. Most likely, it seems, some kind of combination that drove his views and desires at that time. Because the Pope did reject his requests for a divorce, and he wanted children at the time. And so, of course, one consequence of taking power of the Church of England means he can do that. If he wanted to, he can do what he wants. I wonder why this has been sealed up. What was in there? I do have a map. We could have a look, I guess. What is this? Oh, I thought that was a sign, but it's blank. Oh, the warming room. So this would be a fireplace. The only room in the building with fire. So only one room to retreat to in the winters if you needed warming up. Ooh. Okay, so we know that there's growing desire for religious reformations in England at this time. But for now, in 1536, Fountains Abbey is safe. So what came next? Because it's only a 4-year time span. Very short amount of time, especially for institutions of this size. Well, maybe Henry would have been satisfied initially with this kind of first run of tidying up the abbeys and the monasteries. But, I mean, possibly not. He did have quite a reputation for not necessarily being the most reasonable. And when he did want something, he took it by force. He was not a man who was afraid of violence. Oh, I think these are gravestones, are they? Are these tombs? I was too busy looking up. Interesting how they're laid flat. You can kind of see into that one a bit. Don't see too many places with flat gravestones. I don't know too much about gravestones yet. The only one that comes to mind is Quakers. Quakers lay flat stones all of the same shape and size. Because I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know much about Quakers, but from what I was told, it's because in death, they're all considered equal. So there's no hierarchy, which I really like conceptually. So in the time between 1536 and 1539, there was a lot of things happening, a lot of back and forth. There was some protesting in the north of England, which may well have been fuel for what was about to come in 1539. It was kind of comfy, actually. What's this? Maybe it was a well at some point. That is a lot of locks. Now within these abbeys, as well as the monks, you'd have lay brothers, in modern day terms labourers, who would have carried out much of the work in the abbey grounds. And I mentioned earlier that despite how long ago this was, we're talking almost 1,000 years when Fountains Abbey was founded, and coming up to 500 when it was eventually closed. But some of the things that I think are relatable about the monks were their lifestyles. Because let's face it, people haven't changed much. Our needs fundamentally align with the monks who were living here back in the 12th century. And one of the key tenets that they would live by was to avoid an idle lifestyle. So in other words, not to be wasteful with their time, not to live by seeking comfort. And so they were encouraged to be productive, to work, to study, and to be, contributing key parts of the community. Do you know what? I'm pretty sure this is the toilet. I'll know for sure from the outside, but these were the cubicles. And what the monks used to do was just poo straight into, oh my God. Speaking of poo, I just put my hand in a load of pigeon crap. Okay, well that's pertinent at least. But yeah, these days the pigeons poo all over here, or the ducks, whoever it is. But the monks would have been pooing straight into the river. So this was their kind of sewage system, if you like. So I wouldn't encourage it. In fact, I would discourage it. But hypothetically, if you wanted to relive the monk toilet experience, why am I saying this? You would use one of these cubicles and, do your business off the edge. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Here's one of the culprits using the toilet right now. Yeah, so I feel like fundamentally, at least for what little I understand about monks, the lifestyles they chose and devoted themselves to, very much in line with what many of us these days, even people like myself who live in secular communities or mixed communities, it's all very much aligned. As tempting as it is for me to sit and watch Netflix 7 days a week, get takeaways every day, I'm not preaching by the way, but it is in my best interest to not do that and to engage in my community, study, educate myself, improve myself, and to some degree put myself to work in some form or another. Those are the types of lifestyle choices that allow me and any of us to thrive. I'm sure there are many downsides to living in an abbey as well. So I'm not suggesting that I want to time travel back to the 12th century and live here, maybe for a week. But I do like Netflix and I do like takeaways. So let's get to the meat of this story. 1539. What happened? Because we've seen the size of the place now and there's still more to explore. Well, in 1539, Henry declared the dissolution of the greater monasteries. In other words, all of these places in England were to be shut down. They were dissolved. Not only that, the wealth and the land was taken from them and the inhabitants forced to leave. Part of the motivations behind this were all the investigations that Henry VIII had been instigating into these institutions. He'd been sending his men round, or his henchmen, as some records like to call them, with the help of his aide Thomas Cromwell, and they found a lot of things they didn't like. But had they already made up their decision, and were they just looking for a way to explain it and justify it? And as always, the answer is just kind of complex. There was a lot of things in the mix at the time. But that was it. The abbeys would be no more. And so they were taken by force wherever necessary. If the inhabitants and the abbots didn't give up the abbeys, didn't surrender, they would have been killed. In fact, a number of abbots were hanged. Didn't happen here at Fountains Abbey, but I'm sure if it was needed, there would have been no hesitating when it came to doing what was needed to take this place. You might remember I mentioned earlier in the video 3 characteristics that you'll see in many abbeys across England. In fact, if somebody mentions an abandoned abbey, you're probably going to picture something that looks a lot like this, and there's a good reason. And it's because, among other things, there were 3 actions that were taken when these places were taken over. One of them was to strip the roofs for materials. Second one was to strip the glass windows, the stained glass windows. I think this is the bakehouse rather than a coffin, by the way. It looks quite big. This is either the bakery or the brewery. The third thing, before I forget, was that in many cases, they knocked down the stairs. There are still some stairs here, as we've seen. So I guess that wasn't everywhere, but this is a big place. And I can only assume that that was to try and deter people from coming back to these places and living in them again. They wouldn't have had much chance to do that though, because this land was eventually sold on. There's a reason this whole chain of events is regarded by many as one of the biggest kind of transfers of wealth in England's history. And it's because so much was taken into the crown by Henry. What does this look like? It really was a wealth and land transfer on a massive scale. And that's one more reason Henry's reputation kind of dipped a little bit further. And it's because he promised to reallocate a chunk of this wealth to areas that would benefit society, benefit England and the people living here. But did he do that? No, not really. Much of the land and the money went to people who were already wealthy. So all this new money, not going to the people that need it, not going to the people inhabiting the country, just making the wealth wealthier. Probably sounds kind of familiar because, as we're starting to see, I presume this is just a story as old as time, or at least as old as humans. Oh, it sounds weird, but the monk toilets are down here. We got to check those out before we leave. A little bit of trivia for you, by the way, a little bit of a quiz, and I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. How much do you think it cost me to come in here? One adult ticket. I am over 25, as they had to check on the way in. Well over 25, just to be clear. But how much do you think it cost? I'll tell you right after this. So this is the old, I was going to say outhouse, it's probably the wrong term, but these are the cubicles. So this is where the monks would have entered and just gone to the toilet in the river. Very nicely built. And this is where we were earlier when I put on my hand in all that pigeon poo. Would have been pretty stinky down here back in the day. Okay, so before we make our way out and depart from Fountains Abbey, the ticket price. Have you placed your bets? Because I've never been here before. I've been to a few National Trust sites, but I didn't think it was going to be this pricey. To be fair, I am from Yorkshire, and we shouldn't really follow the stereotypes. But Yorkshiremen are a bit notorious for being careful with their pounds, that's all. And I've got my ticket here. It was £21. 21 English pounds. I was a little bit surprised that it was that high. So I need you lot to tell me, have I just not left the house for too long? Do I need to adjust? Or is that kind of expensive? It's obviously a pretty incredible place, there's no doubt. And actually there is much more to this land. Because aside from the Abbey, there is a huge, in fact I'll show you the map in a second. I think there's like a huge garden, a load of follies, not from the same era, much more modern. So let's have a look at the map. I'll show you what's here. We'll have a look around and then you can tell me if the price is fair. It may well be. So this is where I arrived, the visitor centre. This is the Abbey, and then this is the rest. One place I do want to go to is called Fountains Hall, so G. It's actually right near where we are now, and I'll tell you why I want to visit that, but let's have a walk around and we'll check it on the way out. Now Fountains Hall was built a lot more recently than Fountains Abbey. I actually need to check the date for that one. I got a feeling, no, I don't even want to guess. I don't want to guess. But the reason that it's significant for this story is because some of the materials, the stone used to build it, was taken from Fountains Abbey. Okay, where are we going? I think I might have gone the wrong way. Ooh, surprise view. Here we go, surprise view. Ooh. As always with this camera, this will be a much better view in person. Who is that? Maybe it's no one in particular. Now if you do want to visit the Abbey, once again, I'm not promoting it here, I'm not being asked to promote anything, I'm just a visitor. But they do offer guided tours, and you can get audio guides as well if you're into that. I don't really like audio guides. I just find that there's like way too much information, so much detail, and so I just tend to avoid them altogether. But plenty of people like them, and they are available here if that's your thing. To be honest, it's the same with the tour guides for me. There's just so much detail and information, and I'm interested in these places, but I prefer to go light on the history. You know, I don't want to know how many bricks we used to build this wall. So I'm quite a casual visitor in that sense. I like to know a little bit about the place and then just to explore it for myself. That's what I find the most fun. A bit more modern, this one, I think. That feels hollow. Oh, what is that? Ooh, folly. It's going to be hot in here, I reckon. Ah, not too bad. Very echoey. It's just got me thinking back, by the way, to the video we made a month or two ago at Fountains Abbey, because that was a place that's notorious for its car parking prices. And jokes aside, I'm not obsessed with the price, but when I'm showcasing these places, I do want to give you an idea of what to expect and whether you're going to be getting good value or not. Okay, we're back at the Abbey. Let's just one last thing, quickly go and check out Fountains Hall on the way out. See where some of this stone was reused, and then we're going to get out of here, go and plant those giveaway gifts. This video, by the way, is funded by you. If you've been watching, liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting on the videos recently, everyone who's very generously donated in the recent videos, David, Robert, Mad Hatter, massive shout out to you, and of course all of you who are now monthly members on YouTube. Thank you so much to every single one of you for making these videos possible. Hopefully we can do many, many more, and hopefully you're enjoying them as well. Okay, so this is it, Fountains Hall. So some, not all, of the stone here used to build this was taken from the Abbey. That's cool. Very nice. The wedding of Lady Doris and Commander Claire Viner, April 10th, 1923. Okay, it's nice and cool in here as well. Kind of just want to sit down, grab a cold drink. Let's move on though. Let's go and get these gifts finally deposited. Not in the grounds here, but somewhere in North Yorkshire. May have accidentally bought an ice cream, but it is 24 degrees, so, you know. So we're going to a place called Rowcliffe. I don't really know where that is. 24 minutes from here, so I'm going to cut the journey out, don't worry. The reason we're going to Rowcliffe is because they've got a library phone box there. So I can stash these items somewhere weatherproof and try and conceal them well enough so that unless you've seen the video, you won't know where to find them. So let's see how we get on. I do need to eat this first though, so just give me a minute. That was good. Mint choc chip, the best flavour of ice cream, if we're all being totally honest. All right, we made it. All right, so you might have seen the Middleton collab we did a week ago. So we've got a card, pretty cool magnet, and then a notebook. Now, a few of you pointed out in the last video, I should really have written something in the book. Very sensible and obvious in hindsight. So this time, I'm not going to show you it, but there's a note in the front page in case anybody finds this who doesn't know where it came from. And the one thing I did forget last time, some Northern Introvert stickers as well. There is obviously a chance that just somebody from here will pick these up. Oops, where's that band gone? The one thing I needed. Oh, it's there. So, first shelf up from the bottom, tucked away, kind of covered up behind these. Fingers crossed, nobody comes and wants to take this. And if you want to know exactly where we are, let's quickly check, because I don't actually know. We are in Bar Lane in Rowcliffe, postcode YO519NB. So if you're nearby, or if you're not and you want an adventure, see if you can find this. And if you do manage to pick it up, congrats, and let us know in the comments on this video. That's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Good luck finding the gifts. There's going to be some more giveaways pretty soon, actually. Don't know where we're going next, as always, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one. So fingers crossed, I'll see you there.